and you keep re-saying the same things, and I don't want to do that. So what we might do is do a chapter every 2 weeks. I don't think I could do a chapter in a week, but I can do a chapter every 2 weeks. And I'm talking about a longer one too. Like the next chapter, in chapter 20, is 29 verses long. Well, I can't do that in one. I mean, I just can't do that. I can't study all that, because whether I present it to you or not, I still have to study it all out, and it would take a lot longer than my mind can handle to get all that, and then I couldn't deliver it to you anyway, because some things I just can't leave out, and there's more here than Ruckman's commentary, because there's always going to be more, and the Lord shows you more. Some of the stuff tonight, I didn't get from a commentary, but the Lord gave it to me, but I don't want to leave it out. Anyway, let's pick it up in chapter 19, and we left off in verse 23. So we're only going to go from 23 to 29. Maybe we'll get done a little early tonight. And I want to read from verse 23 to 29. He says, "Oh, that my words were now written. Oh, that they were printed in a book, that they were graven with an iron pen and lead in the rock forever. For I know that my Redeemer liveth, and that he shall stand at the latter day upon the earth. And though after my skin worms destroy this body, yet in my flesh shall I see God, whom I shall see for myself, and mine eyes shall behold, and not another, though my reins be consumed within me. But ye should say, why persecute we him, seeing the root of the matter is found in me? Be ye afraid of the sword, for wrath bringeth in the punishments, or bringeth the punishments of the sword, that ye may know that there is a judgment." So, if you remember last week, we were more or less talking about how Job suffered from the social outcome of what God allowed to happen to him, and that he was kind of belly aching over that because of the servants and his relatives and his wife and just everything that befell him. He pretty much lost everybody, and then these three friends roll into town, and what do? They abuse him just continually. So you can understand why he's hurting. And now he's wishing that it was all written down. He wants there to be a record of what has happened to him. Not just like, he's just one person that passed off. We all want that. We all want justice. And really you shouldn't want too much justice. You shouldn't. But we all want there to be an account. We really do. Because if somebody, now listen, you're doing somebody else wrong, maybe you're not so hip on that account. But if it's being done to you, being done wrong to you, you want an account. You want somebody to take note on it. You want to be, you know what's so disparaging about this country right now? I do not think that I can go into a court of law without the politics being in sway against me. There's no worse feeling in a nation when you realize that you can't get justice when you walk into a court of law. That angers me. And you know what? It would anger anybody. And Job's angry. He said, hey, I want this stuff written in a book. I want it written in a book. When we read down through there, let me just say this before we get on here. When we read down through there, 3 verses, actually 2 verses came to mind, and a third one popped up when I was looking things up, that sums up what he's saying from verse 23 to 29. And he's talking about men dying and then being resurrected and standing before God in judgment. That's what he's telling them. Hebrews 9:27 says, and it is appointed to men once to die, but after this the judgment. Something you're guaranteed that you are going to, all of us are going to judgment. There's not one of us in this room would be spared judgment, because we'll stand before God and give an account. In Daniel 7:10, it says, a fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. Thousands ministered unto him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The judgment was set, and the books were opened. He's talking about a book here. He's talking about words being written in a book. In Revelation 20:12, he says, I saw the dead, small and great, stand before God, and the books were opened. And another book was opened, which is the book of life, and the dead were judged out of those things which are written in the books according to their works. I think Job's he's going to say, oh, that my words are written in a book, and he doesn't realize it, but they are. There is a writer present, Elihu. And I don't know if he's writing down everything. I don't know if God's just given him, some people have photographic memory. Some people maybe they have such a thing as audio memory. I don't know. But he's going to remember every word that's being said, and he's going to put it down. So without Job even knowing, his words were being written down for time and eternity. I mean, not just written down as an account for his lifetime. Doesn't the Bible say, heaven and earth shall pass away, but my word shall not pass away? Job's part of that. I mean, here he is wanting an account, and buddy, he's got it. Everything he said is being recorded. Now, I don't know if every man's words are written down. I said written down, but I know that every man's words are recorded. And Job not only had them recorded, he had them written down. But he said there in Matthew 12:36, but I say unto you that every idle word that men shall speak, they shall give account thereof in the day of judgment. God's somehow, whether he's just, of course he's got perfect memory, but every word's being recorded. And every word can be brought back in a court of law. Aren't you glad that our words, most of them are probably under the blood? And we don't have to give account because those things have already been accounted for. I thank God for that. Now the interesting thing about this is when Job is saying this. Job is not saying this with an Old Testament right next to him, and he's just kind of been perusing and commenting based upon what he's already read. There's nothing for him to read. There is no Old Testament. This is before Moses. This is the first writing. And he says, oh, that my words were now written. Oh, that they were printed in a book. And sure enough, they were. That book is right in front of me, right here. And his words are printed in there. We're talking before 1500 BC. I don't know how much before, maybe 14, maybe 1300, or should I say no, 16 or 1700? Not going the other way. But maybe several hundred years before Moses ever wrote Genesis. Job's words. But they didn't wind up in a book till how long? I mean, it's not till what, 200, 100, between 100 and 200 AD before the Old and New Testament winds up in a book. Yet, we're talking about a book here. He says in verse 24, he says that they were graven with an iron pen and lead in the rock forever. So between verse 23 and 24, we have three methods of printing that he's talking about, or recording words. The first one's paper and ink. He said they were written down and then put into a book, verse 23. But then he says engraving into stone with an iron instrument, with an iron pen, verse 24. Well, I think that's how the children of Israel ended up getting the Ten Commandments, wasn't it? Wasn't it engraved in stone? I mean, written by the hand of God. But he wants these words engraved. You know what we say? That's written in stone. I mean, that's what we say. Something's ironclad in concrete, even that, we say it's written in stone. But then he mentions another one in verse 24, words engraved. And this is what Dr. Ruckman said, is words engraved in soft lead and then mounted on or in the rock. A plaque on a rock? I don't know. But it's funny that there are plaques and rocks all over the country with the Ten Commandments, or at least there used to be outside of courthouses. You would have usually, a lot of times they were bronze, a bronze plaque, and then it was a huge rock or monument made of concrete or whatever, and it was drilled and set into that thing. Now, I don't know if this is exactly what he's talking about here, but I'll tell you what, here's something, some of you might know this, some of you wouldn't because you're not old enough to know it. Prior to the CD, and I tried to understand how it works and still don't, the method of recording words, and this does take me back, I remember having a reel-to-reel. Okay, and that's only because I had some taped studies of Dr. Ruckman's that was given to me. And I ended up getting a reel-to-reel. It was as foreign to me because I was raised in the when cassettes came along, actually 8-track tapes. I remember having an 8-track tape player. It wasn't in my car, it was in somebody else's, I guess. But I mean, I remember having it. I remember my brother had an 8-track player in his bedroom, and you know, we thought that was cat's meow, man. If you had an 8-track tape player, but then cassettes came along, and I mean, man, this is, you know, I'm thinking this is superior technology, you know. And I'll tell you what, sometimes I still believe that old way of recording is better, but I can't prove that. Some people think that vinyl's better, you know, like records. They think the sound's better. I don't know. There's this big thing out there in the Ethernet about that, and I don't care. As long as I can understand the words or hear the music, I guess I'm fine with it. But I remember that reel-to-reel, that 8-track or those cassettes, they all used the same chemical composition, and it all comes from a rock. That is, whether it was iron oxide or chromium dioxide, those things, those minerals, they come from rocks. He mentions up there about being engraved or in the rock. Well, maybe it all is. Then the Bible say, and he answered and said unto them, I tell you that if any should, that's not the word, it's the other one, the idle word that men shall speak that give account in the day of judgment. Can you imagine if there's a rock out there recording your conversation? Because he said this, and he answered and said to them, I tell you, if these should hold their peace, the stones would immediately cry out. Huh. Well, what could they tell about you? So I'm walking around looking at the rocks in my yard going, okay. All those bad days I had out here, you know, smashing my hand, saying something I shouldn't, and they're recorded. Huh? I got some big, I put some big rocks right around my house. I'm doomed. I mean, listening to every word. But he said the rocks would cry out. Well, what is it about these rocks? Well, I can tell you one thing. They contain the minerals that are used to make tape that you and I record words on. So, something to think of. He said there in Jeremiah 17:1, and this is about that iron pen, the sin of Judah is written with a pen of iron, with the point of a diamond. It is graven upon the table of their heart and upon the horns of your altars. This has something to do with the law, because without the law, there is no transgression. The strength of sin is the law. If you don't have the law, you don't have any transgression, the Bible says. So this iron pen is, yeah, it is recording the sin because it's recorded the law. Romans 7:7 says, what shall we say then? Is the law sin? God forbid. Nay, I had not known sin, but by the law. For I had not known lust, except the law had said, thou shalt not covet. So it had to be written down before it ever revealed that I had this sin of covetousness. It had to be, it was engraved. But you know what? It's not just engraved in stone. It's engraved on the heart. He says there in Romans chapter 2, verse 14 and 15, for when the Gentiles which have not the law do by nature the things contained in the law, these having not the law are a law unto themselves, which show the work of the law written in their hearts, their conscience also bearing witness, and their thoughts the meanwhile accusing or else excusing one another. God has wrote that thing in there with an iron pen with a diamond tip. And those moral laws are there. It doesn't matter where you live. Doesn't matter if you've ever seen a Bible in your life. It doesn't matter if you've ever heard the Ten Commandments. God has engraven that. And God will judge. He can judge anyone based upon their conscience. So don't think that God, well, what if they've never heard the gospel? God will judge them according to their conscience. Huh? Yeah. Well, if they violate their conscience, start bowing down to, a piece of stone or wood, I mean, they're doing that to pacify their own conscience. He'll judge them accordingly. That thing about the conscience, man, I mean, when you're young, okay, when you get older, that thing might be deader than a hammer. You violated it so many times, but when you're young, I mean, it'll make you shake when you're doing something wrong. Sneaking around and doing something you shouldn't do, you know. I mean, the guy that ever swiped anything from a store, the first time he ever swiped it, let me tell you what, his conscience was screaming at him. Now, maybe by the 50th time, he didn't even hear a whimper. But that's because he just calloused over his own conscience. He deadened it by continually defiling it. Paul talked about living in good conscience all the time. Now, I think he did up until the time Stephen was killed. And then his conscience began to prick him. That's why the Lord said, it's hard for thee to kick against the pricks. Because that conscience starts pricking you and telling you you're doing wrong, man, it can take sleep from you. A lot of people get by that real quick. They just keep offending. Next thing you know, they're a hardened criminal. They got no, we call them, what do you call somebody that doesn't have psychopath, or not a psychopath, but a sociopath? Well, they got there somehow. So, when he mentions there, they were graven with an iron pen and lead in the rock forever. Well, God's engraving that on the hearts of men whether they ever pick up a King James Bible or not. All right, let's look at verse 25 and read through verse 27. He says, "For I know that my Redeemer liveth, and that he shall stand at the latter day upon the earth. And though after my skin worms destroy this body, yet in my flesh shall I see God, whom I shall see for myself, and mine eyes shall behold him and not another, though my reins be consumed within me." So, not only does my Redeemer liveth, that could be first advent, but will visibly, physically stand on the earth, second advent. And this is the first book of the Bible. I mean, that one that was written. And he's already prophesying about the first and second advent. Acts 1:11 says, "Which also said, Ye men of Galilee, why stand ye gazing up into heaven? This same Jesus which is taken up from you into heaven shall so come in like manner as you've seen him go into heaven." I mean, we could visibly see him at the first advent, but we watched, the disciples watched him ascend, and the whole world will watch him come back. I mean, it's not going to be, like the Jehovah's Witnesses think, or maybe the Seventh-day Adventists, that it's going to be a secret return like at Pentecost in a spiritual form. No. He's going to stand on the earth in the latter days. Job's telling you that. Now, when we're talking about those verses, verse 23 to verse 27, the doctrinal import, or the important thing here, is not that Job understands all that he said, but that he said it. Okay? Many of these prophets could not possibly, unless God gave them some type of supernatural understanding and look into the future, they couldn't have possibly understood what they were saying. Now, they weren't babbling. They were saying exactly what God, and maybe at the time it made perfect sense to them. Maybe it did. But there's a lot of things they were saying. Job is talking, think of the things he's talking about. In verse 23, he's talking about written words, how important they are. This is all about the words. Even Jesus Christ, in the beginning, was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Then he talks about a book in verse 23. Psalm 40 verse 7 says, "Then said I, Lo, I come, in the volume of the book it is written of me." This thing winds up as a book. And it's God's book, God's words. They're written words. Then he mentions a rock. Verse 24. In 1 Corinthians 10:4 says, "And did all drink of that spiritual rock, and drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ." He says, then he talks about it abiding forever, that it would last forever. Verse 24. Job mentions his Redeemer is alive at the time of his complaint in verse 25. You know what The important thing is that your Redeemer liveth, because the dead one's no good. The Redeemer is able to resurrect a man's body and put it back together in verse 26. Now that's interesting. Verse 26, when you think about that, people have this, it says, though after my skin worms destroy this body, yet in my flesh I shall see God. Now, I don't know if he's talking about a general judgment resurrection, but if you're going to stand before God in judgment, there's got to be something to stand there, right? Now we talk about that soulish body, and I want to be careful what I say because I don't know absolutely for sure, but it does look like God, when he brings up the dead, because some of them got ground up, some of them turned to worm food, and some of them got eaten by fish, and you couldn't find there's a particle of them in every continent and every sea, they're scattered all. He brings them together and they stand before him. So even the dead receive some type of resurrection. The souls I know are brought up there, but it looks like their bodies are brought up too. Now I couldn't comment any more on that because I don't understand. But when we talk about saved people, he gives them a resurrection body. And it is that body that's changed. Isn't just like ours will be changed in a moment, a twinkling of an eye. So they get that body. In verse 27, I thought this was an interesting passage because the body that's resurrected comes with Job's eyes and Job's mind, not another. Sometimes I think people think that somehow when they're resurrected, they're going to be so different, it's not going to be them anymore. It's like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, when the Holy Ghost gets you. It changes us so much that, who? You don't even remember who no, it's you. Your eyes, your mind. Just not that sinful flesh. And some things are going to be gone from your mind eventually, and it'll take 1,000 years for that to happen. But some things will be wiped from the mind, former things that'll pass away. But everything can't. It can't be. Why is Jesus Christ bearing the marks of the crucifixion if all the former things are completely forgotten? I don't think that's what that verse is talking about. There's going to be some formal things. Hopefully, we won't remember our sins. That'd be nice. Not to be tormented forever thinking about, oh man, when I was down there, man, I really made a mess of things for a while. Who would want that to be? Even Paul violated. Of course, his is written in the book. He can't get rid of them. Be glad you're not a chapter in here, because he records all the sins of the saints. But you know what's interesting in Hebrews 11, when he starts talking about those same men, none of their sins are recorded. They're not brought up again. That's what the blood did. That's what Christ's sacrifice did. And that itself would be great. Just the fact we get up there and it's like nobody knows there's any sin because it's all under the blood. So that'd be nice to be able to forget about that. I don't think for 1,000 years, though, we're going to be able to forget everything. There's going to be a reason why you're not reigning, or that you are reigning. I don't think it's going to be, one's going to look at another and going, why have you got a crown on? Isn't that strange? You'll know exactly why they've got one and you don't. Or you'll know exactly why you've got one on your head and they don't. You'll know why. I don't think that's going to be hidden from us. In fact, that thing's going to have an eternal impact. So I don't think, listen, nobody's going to be unhappy. Nobody's going to be unhappy because the angels they're destined to be ministers, period. They're not reigning over not one parcel, not one acre of heaven and earth are they going to reign over, according to what I read. That's for you and I to reign over. Man. But that doesn't mean they're going to be unhappy. They get to minister unto them that shall be heirs of salvation. That'd be man. Because there's still going to be men coming along, right? If you get resorted to that, and I think that's what he means by kings and priest, because the priest is one that ministers. And I believe that if you don't suffer for him, you resort to a secondary station that the angels have resorted to because of their fall. And because you wouldn't suffer, there you are. You get to minister. I mean, don't settle for less, but some people want to. I mean, rather than, suffer any embarrassment for the Lord, any suffering, boy, let's just not do it, Don't want to offend anybody down here. We're so trained to be so careful about people's feelings, we'll let them drop right off into hell. But at least I was nice to you. It's kind of crazy, And you walk around the same way, you feel like, this person you feel like you can approach, but this person you don't really feel like you can approach. I don't know if that's a good gauge or not. I think somehow just approach them some way. Maybe you wouldn't want to have there's some you can't, there's no time for a conversation, but there might be time for a track. There might be time for an invitation to church. There might be a word that you could say, Either that or plaster your car with, just scripture magnets. I mean, if that's how you're going to get, just don't speed. Don't do this. Don't do any finger communicating. Yeah, one individual I never recommended he ever have anything on his car because you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, you never pull a gun, man. Anyway. But Job says all those things there, and he's not speaking with the advantage of an Old New Testament in front of him. I mean, he's speaking this. It's the earliest writing there is, man. This is straight from the Lord. I mean, he's kind of unfolding. Here we are, the first book that was ever written, the book of Job, and we're unfolding the end. God's already got the end. He's already put it into print before Moses ever given them the law. I just thought of it myself. I had something like that. It's the earliest, but it just dawned on me, man, we're writing about the end. Yeah. Thank you, Lord. We know that came from God. It can come from me. Look at verse 28 and 29. It says, but ye should say, why persecute we him, seeing the root of the matter is found in me? Be ye afraid of the sword, for wrath bringeth the punishments of the sword, that ye may know there is a judgment. Now, Job's saying, but ye should say, now he's trying to put words in their mouth, but ye should say, why persecute we him? Talking about Job, seeing the root of the matter is found in me. When somebody's out to get you and you haven't done anything to them, had Job done anything to them? Huh? He spit on their camels or anything when they rode in? No, as far as we know, he never did anything to them. Except he bested them. Would you agree with that? He bested all of them. Job bested everybody. He's the richest, most powerful man of the East. It may not happen down here. Sometimes some people, I've had problems and I'm like, I don't know why I'm having a problem. I've done nothing to them. And yet I don't know why. And here it comes, and it's happened, I don't know, it's not happened a lot, but it's happened a few times. And I'm like, what is going on here? What has caused, because sooner or later, you get to the root of the matter. And maybe not down here, but God will get to it. And believe me, brethren can go to judgment against brethren at the judgment seat of Christ. If you don't forgive that thing down here, then it's going up there, and it's going to get brought up again. And the root of the matter will be exposed. And whether you handled it right or you handled it wrong. And I'm telling you, the root of the matter, look what he says there. This is what they should be saying. His three friends. Why persecute we him? Seeing the root of the matter is found in me. You say, what is that? Well, I'll tell you, it's a root. It's a root of something. How about a root of envy or bitterness. Could that be the root that will produce that kind of vitriol that he's been experiencing all this time? Could that be it? Because he hasn't done anything to them. He hasn't assaulted them. They didn't lose anything as a result of what fell on him. Why would they treat him like that? If they weren't ever friends, okay. If they were enemies, it's like, rejoicing over the prey. But they're his friends, and they're treating him like this. So now he's trying to put words in their mouth and saying, here's what you should be saying. Why are you attacking me when or why am I attacking him when the problem is with me? That's what Job's telling them that they should be saying. Proverbs 27:4 says, wrath is cruel and anger is outrageous, but who is able to stand before envy? You see, I think this is what it is. It is. Listen, if he pictures the Jewish remnant, that Jew has been persecuted for 2 millennia by the Gentiles. Granted, God has allowed that hand to be on them, that hand of judgment. But you know why the Gentiles persecute that Jew? Envy. Look, compared to the Gentiles, most Jews are successful. They can make money. They're talented scientists. They're talented musicians. They're talented actors. They change their names to get Gentile names, and you find out their name's Goldstein or something like that. They're jewelers. They're some of the bankers. They're some of the wealthiest people in the world and the most talented. So a lot of the Gentiles hate him because they envy him. And they want to take what they have. And they've been doing it for a long time. I would never be a part of putting my hand against a Jew for that. Not even a Gentile, but especially a Jew. Hebrews 12:15 says, looking diligently, lest any man fail the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness springing up trouble you, and thereby many be defiled. A root of bitterness. I don't know what these guys would be bitter about, but I know what they could be envious about. There was plenty to be envious of. And maybe they had their sights set on getting a part of this someday, or being a part of Job's empire someday, or why they weren't. Maybe if we would have been in control of your empire, maybe this wouldn't have happened to you. How some folks are. They think they're God's gift, for this or that. 1 Timothy 6:10 says, and here's a root, for the love of money. That's why I think there's something, the root of the matter, I don't know if we really see it perfectly. I think we got a glimpse of it. But I think if the love of money is the root of all evil, this probably had something to do with money. For the love of money is the root of all evil, which while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. And that is, don't love money. You got to have money. You got to use money, but don't love it above everything in this earth. It'll just bring you to sorrow. Then he tells them there in verse 29, he says, be afraid of the sword. Now, I know I've seen this before, but I just bring it up, and I know you've probably seen it before. But words and sword is just taking the S and flipping it around to the front. Now here's what I thought about, because he mentions there, be ye afraid of the sword, for wrath bringeth the punishments of the sword. Now that made me think of Romans 13, where he says, for he is a minister of God to thee for good, but if thou do that which is evil, be afraid, for he beareth not the sword in vain. For he is a minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. And then I got to thinking about it. What this thing, when you stand before a judge, he don't have no sword on him. He just has words. And as he's pronouncing those words, somebody brings out the sword and executes judgment. They haul you away, whatever they're going to do with you, right? There's a verse over there in Revelation 19:15. It says, out of his mouth goeth a sharp sword, that with it he should smite the nations, and he shall rule them with a rod of iron, and he treadeth the winepress of the fierceness and wrath of Almighty God. And here, the words and the sword are all one. Because it says a sharp two-edged sword goeth out of his mouth. And it's the words. And what he's telling them is, you better be afraid. You better be afraid of the sword, for wrath bringeth the punishment of the sword. Well, let me tell you something. Long before you see the sword coming down on you, it's the words. But when Jesus Christ comes back, those words are the sword. Judgment and words are punishment, and words, they'll go hand in hand. I ultimately believe that everything is about words. It comes down to words. By thy words shalt thou be justified. By thy words shalt thou be condemned. The creation took place because of words. Rebellion took place because words were said in the heart. It's about words. And flip it around, there's a sword that comes with that. And a sharp sword goeth out of his mouth. Verse 29, Job is telling his three friends that there's a judgment for people like them. That you can spout off all you want, say what you want, condemn all you want, but one day you yourself will be brought into judgment. And he's reminding them of that. And that's good that you get reminded. Now, does it help? Well, let's see. The very next chapter, we find this verse, 20 verse 5, that the triumphing of the wicked is short, and the joy of the hypocrite but for a moment. And then in verse 11 it says, his bones are full of the sin of his youth, which shall lie down with him in the dust. Okay? 20 verse 29, this is the portion of a wicked man from God, and the heritage appointed to him by God. His heritage was wasteland, desolation. They don't just calm down and lower the temperament, they ramp it up a level as we're going forward here. There's a lesson here, and we've talked about it, is when you come across such a man or a woman, and Dr. Ruckman in his commentary gave a couple examples of people that he had come across, and many of them had been saved and then walked away from God. Some of them because they didn't have anybody to put a foundation under them. And they got back into the same old sin. And then they lived that life. And you know that they that live after the flesh, if you live after the flesh, you shall die. A lot of the things that we do, listen, if we weren't in church and we weren't trying to obey this book, doing the right thing, we'd be out there in the world doing something dangerous. I mean, Christians have the most boring lives there are. On Friday and Saturday night, we're the most boring people on the planet Earth, while the rest of the world is living it up. And also engaging in practices that can cost you your life. If not now, just gradually take your life from you. Sit around drinking and smoking and carousing and, getting venereal diseases. You know what I'm talking about. But the lesson here is when you come across such a man or woman that God has beaten this badly, say prayers of mercy and compassion with actions of pity. And the reason I say that is there's verses on this, but you want to make sure that you're in the clear. Even if they've done you wrong, even if you have aught against such individuals, and you've waited a long time to see them get theirs, okay? Maybe they deserve it. Don't do a jig. Don't do a dance. Don't come out with shouts of joy. The only time in the Bible that I can see where we're ever to do that, well, there's a couple times. One is, when the wicked perish, the righteous shout. And it's talking about evil rulers, that we shout, I guess, for joy or shout praise to God. But the only other time is when Babylon falls. We're to have a party when they fall. But when it comes to everybody else, and I'll tell you what, especially brothers and sisters in Christ, even if you know and everybody else knows they deserved what they got, don't. Just don't do it. You can, when you hear about it, you can go, okay. And maybe inside you're like, okay, they finally got theirs. Okay, Lord, I'm good. I'm good with it. And maybe, I've been convicted to pray for an individual that I felt dealt me wrong. And I said, Lord, I'm asking you to have mercy on them. Why? Mercy rejoiceth against judgment. I do not want to draw his attention to me, because I could be just as worthy of the same beating that he just got. So you be careful. What these guys are messing with, listen, if Job doesn't pray for them, what's God going to do? Sounds like he's going to put him through the same mill he just put Job through. Man, Job's a lot more merciful than they were. He prays for them. They ain't said one prayer for him yet, except to condemn him. I'll tell you what, let the fear of God dictate what you do. Proverbs 24, this is the last two verses. Proverbs 24, verse 17, 18. Now this doesn't have to do with a brother and sister in Christ. This is a real enemy. And listen to me, okay? I'm not one of these preachers, I forgive them for everything. No, there's some things I would ask vengeance for. Somebody killed somebody in my family. I'm not talking about an accident either. Murdered somebody in my family. I wouldn't do the vengeance. I'd do my best not to, but I want God to. If some pedophile messed with my kids or my grandkids, I want judgment. I would want vengeance, okay? I'm not one of these guys, well, you just got to. Now, I may have to forgive them in a sense of this life, but not the next one. And if I can win them to God, it might be an offsetting thing. But I still would want them to go to prison, okay? But you got to be careful about rejoicing about that. He says that because this is how serious it is. Proverbs 24, 17, 18. Rejoice not when thine enemy falleth, and let not thine heart be glad when he stumbleth, lest the Lord see it and it displease him, and he turn away his wrath from him. If you really want him to get it and God to keep on him, keep giving it to him, just keep quiet. Say, okay, Lord. What you're going to do. But not showing this, jumping up and down. And how many times have we seen them rejoicing in the streets, when somebody got killed over here, or when 9/11 happened, they're over there rejoicing in the streets over the killing of 3,000 innocent people that just went to work that day. That kind of thing. No Christian should ever be guilty of that. And, let's face it, man, Christians they can make a mess of things. Huh? Yeah, they shoot their wounded. Yeah. Well, I have no problem with stepping over the wounded to keep going for God if they're not going to get up. Okay? There's just some things that are hard in Christianity. It doesn't mean you have to pile on. If God is punishing someone, it's like, even the lost have more compassion than the saved. When Jonah's on the boat, they did try to save him. They lightened the ship. They threw some stuff over, some good stuff, to save his hide. And he's the one that brought all this on him. They still showed him some compassion. And finally they said, man, it'd be different if a bunch of pirates are after you. You got God after you. We got to throw you overboard. We got no choice here. And even he said, you got to throw me overboard. But they weren't happy about it. I think sometimes we're happy, man. We see somebody that gets thrown over the side and just drugged to the bottom of what's his locker name? David Jones' locker. All the way to the bottom, we're happy about that, And sometimes we get to celebrating and we get someone's attention. And I don't know if it's even necessarily the Lord, but it could be the devil. And the devil goes, did you see what he just did? Lord says, what? Did you see what he just did? They bring it to his attention, Well, won't you let me have them for a little while? See what I can do with that. Man, you'll be sorry you ever laughed. You know what usually, I can tell you this, it doesn't matter who we are. One of these days, man, you're going to find yourself at the mercy of God. And I don't know what kind of trouble that'll be. I don't know where you'll find it, but, I think it'll find you. And some of it's just for suffering's sake. some of it may be that God's chastising you, and some of it may be that He's trying to teach you something. But no matter how it comes, it can be devastating, and it can be hurtful. So just be careful about other folks. You know, some people talk a big fight. Next thing you know, they're out of the fight. Well, that's no reason for us to rejoice about it. We should be saddened by it. And you know what you can always do? Find the worst you can find and send a prayer for them. If they're God's child, send a prayer for them. Pray for them. Show some mercy. Ask God to, make things better for them if you can. So, all right. That's what I got tonight. Anybody got a question or a comment?